Alexander suffers from insomnia and can only sleep while holding someone. And I am Alexander's male assistant, lying in his bed every night. Until I awakened to the ability to read minds and heard his inner thoughts. Tonight, I cuddled with my wife again. Wife is so cute and smells so nice. If I didn't pretend to have insomnia, how could I sleep while holding my wife? Only then did I realize that not only did Alexander not have insomnia, but he had also been secretly coveting me all along. But I'm a straight guy. At night, after taking a shower, I walked into the bedroom as usual. On the large bed, a handsome man was leaning against the headboard, reading a book. His skin was fair and delicate, glowing with an enticing radiance, almost like porcelain. Resting on his high, straight nose was a pair of gold-rimmed glasses as he read. Without lifting his gaze, he remained expressionless. He was none other than my boss, Alexander, the president of the Shang Corporation. I climbed onto the bed voluntarily and slipped under the warm covers. Thinking back to a year ago when I first climbed into his bed, I was so nervous that I didn't even dare to look at Alexander. But over time, I got used to it. Now, as long as I'm in bed, I just treat Alexander as my roommate. After all, I'm straight, and he's straight toe hats there to be afraid of. I cleared my throat lightly. Alexander, it's time to sleep. He nodded, his expression cool. All right. He placed his book on the bedside table. For some reason, I felt that his movements carried a hint of urgency and nervousness. He turned his back to me, so I couldn't see his expression. My arm instinctively wrapped tightly around his waist. I heard his breathing quicken, his body stiffening like marble, and my thoughts gradually drifted away. A year ago, I broke up with Linda. Linda and I had been dating since our sophomore year in college. 2 years ago, we graduated. I joined the Shang Corporation as Alexander's secretary, while Linda fulfilled her dream of becoming a flight attendant. I thought we would meet each other's families and step into marriage together. Until last year, when my father was diagnosed with cancer and needed 700,000 yuan for treatment, Linda broke up with me. I agreed. I didn't want to burden her. While I was desperately trying to raise money, Alexander suddenly extended an offer. He handed me a check for 1 million yuan, asking me to be his human pillow to help with his insomnia, for a duration of 1 year. He claimed he had insomnia. The reason he chose me was because of an incident when we were on a business trip. Our car broke down, and we had to stay at a nearby hotel. There was only one room left, and it had only one small bed. With no other option, Alexander and I squeezed onto the small bed for the night. That night, Alexander slept soundly. He said that experience made him realize that sleeping while holding me allowed him to rest well. Before that, he had to rely on medication or endure sleepless nights until he passed out from exhaustion. He said he needed me to help him recover from his insomnia. If, after a year, his insomnia wasn't cured, I could decide whether to renew the contract with the same 1 million yuan compensation. Unable to resist the temptation of 1 million yuan, I accepted his offer. I figured I was just a human pillow for him to hold, and since Alexander was also straight, there shouldn't be any issues. Now, only 2 months remain before our contract ends. As my thoughts faded, so did my consciousness. I've always been someone who adapts to circumstances. The moment I touch a bed, I fall asleep in no time. Half asleep, I faintly felt an 8-legged octopus wrapping tightly around me, as if it had caught its prey and would never let go. The next morning, I got up early. As Alexander's assistant, how could I wake up later than him? Wait, why was Alexander already awake? I scrambled out of bed in a panic and rushed to the bathroom to take a shower. Just as I pushed open the bathroom door, I was met with a sight Alexander, with his 8-pack abs and V-line, standing under the shower. His wet hair dripped water, and his eyes held a trace of surprise as he looked at me. My face instantly turned red, and I slammed the bathroom door shut. Nervous and embarrassed, I stammered, "Sorry, Alexander, I didn't see anything." I hurriedly retreated, thinking as I walked. Alexander's future girlfriend was really in for a treat. But I found it odd. Alexander was incredibly good-looking and came from an exceptional family. Almost every female employee in the company secretly had a crush on him. Logically speaking, he should be highly sought after, so why was he still single? I once suspected that Alexander might be gay, but then I witnessed him being pulled aside and confessed to by a man. He reacted with intense disgust and later scrubbed his hands with alcohol multiple times. That convinced me that my suspicion was ridiculous. Besides, Alexander had been holding me while sleeping for almost a year, and nothing had ever happened between us. Just then, Alexander stepped out of the bathroom and said, "You can go wash up now." "Okay, Alexander," I replied respectfully. From the corner of my eye, I noticed his ears were slightly red. As I walked past Alexander, my shoulder accidentally brushed against his. And then I heard, "Wife saw my abs. Will he be satisfied with my physique? I haven't worked out for a few days. Will wife think I'm losing my charm? I'd better hit the gym soon. Can't let wife be disappointed." I stared at Alexander in shock. What was he saying? His lips weren't moving. Yet those words kept ringing in my ears. Wife looked at me. Wife looks so cute right after waking up. I don't want him to go to work. I want to hide him away. I want to shower with wife and scrub his back. Every hair on my body stood on end. I was hearing Alexander's thoughts. But what shocked me even more was why were his thoughts filled with these things. When I stepped back, the inner voice disappeared. Alexander looked at me in confusion. "What's wrong? Your face is red." Avoiding his gaze, I nervously replied, "It's nothing." After hastily finishing my shower, I arrived at the dining room. As usual, breakfast was already prepared. Alexander said warmly, "Come eat breakfast." Before, I would have nonchalantly sat down to eat. But now, I suddenly realized sleeping in the same bed every night was already ambiguous enough, and having breakfast together in the morning felt even more intimate. I shook my head. "No need, boss. I'll just grab some snacks at the office." Alexander's tone was firm. "Snacks are unhealthy. Come eat. It's all your favorite food." Since he was still my boss, I had no choice but to obey. Sitting at the dining table, I kept my head down, focusing on my food. Suddenly, the long legs of the man beside me brushed against mine, and his thoughts once again echoed in my ears. Wife eating looks so adorable and well-behaved. Wife is too skinny. I need to fatten him up. I really want to feed wife myself. My fingers trembled, and I accidentally spilled my soup. Looking up, I saw Alexander calmly drinking his own soup, his lips unmoving. I instinctively withdrew my leg. Instantly, his thoughts vanished. I immediately understood whenever I physically touched Alexander, I could hear his thoughts. Alexander looked at me with a hint of concern. "What's wrong? Is breakfast not to your taste today?" I quickly shook my head. "No, I just lost my grip." Then keep eating." Alexander's expression remained composed. If I hadn't heard his thoughts, I never would have imagined that he could think such sappy things. Sitting in the car, I tried my best to shrink into myself, avoiding any physical contact with Alexander. But somehow, whether intentionally or not, Alexander's long legs, wrapped in tailored suit pants, kept brushing against mine. "Wife's green tie looks great today. I need to find an opportunity to take him for some custom suits, buy him more ties, belts, shoes, and watches. Why isn't wife looking at me?" My heart pounded wildly. The feeling of being secretly coveted by my boss made my scalp tingle, and yet I couldn't let him notice that I knew. If he found out, things would only get more awkward. Upon arriving at the company, I finally sat at my desk, and only then did my stiff back relax. This is insane. My boss, Alexander, has lost his mind. The whole world must have gone mad. How could Alexander possibly have a crush on me? What does he even like about me? After thinking it through, I decided to pretend I had no idea about Alexander's thoughts. There were only 2 months left on our contract. As long as I endured these 2 months and got my $1,000,000, I would resign immediately. Out of curiosity, I tested my ability by touching other people, but I couldn't hear their thoughts. It seemed I could only hear Alexander's inner voice. In the afternoon, I delivered some documents to Alexander's office. I kept my head down, placed the documents on his desk, and was about to make a quick exit. But Alexander stopped me. Wait. I turned around, looking at him in confusion. Alexander opened a drawer and took out a large box of candy and cakes. Expressionlessly, he said, "A friend gave me these. I can't finish them. Take them." I didn't dare refuse. As I reached out to accept them, my fingers brushed against his. These are wife's favorites. I specially had them flown in from Country A. My fingers recoiled as if electrocuted. "Thank you, Alexander." Clutching the box, I quickly left. Back at my desk, I stared at the delicate, beautifully packaged desserts. Alexander often gave me sweets, and I had always thought they were from his friends. I never imagined that he had ordered them specifically for me. I could only pretend I didn't know. A few days later, the autumn wind turned chilly. Before I knew it, the season had changed. One morning, Alexander and I were getting ready to leave for work when he suddenly said he had forgotten something and went back inside. I had no choice but to stand at the entrance and wait for him. Bored, I gazed at the sky. Suddenly, something warm and fluffy wrapped around my neck from behind. Startled, I turned around and saw Alexander withdrawing his hands. His face remained indifferent. "A friend gave me this scarf. I have an extra one. You've been doing well lately, so I'm giving it to you." I immediately shook my head, intending to refuse. But Alexander's eyes carried a strong, authoritative gaze. "Take it." Since I hadn't resigned yet, I didn't dare offend him, so I nodded. On the way to work, as I got into the car, my hand accidentally brushed against his. "I wonder if wife likes the scarf. I spent 2 months knitting it. Wife likes blue. The blue scarf really complements his skin tone." I froze. What? He knitted this scarf himself? I couldn't even picture Alexander, usually so high and mighty, sitting down and knitting. The warmth of the scarf seeped through my skin and into my heart. From the corner of my eye, I saw that although his expression remained serious, the corners of his lips were slightly upturned. My emotions, once calm, began to ripple like a lake disturbed by stones. That evening, I texted Alexander, saying I wanted to visit my father in the hospital and would return later. Just as I stepped out of the company, I saw a woman in a yellow dress. When I got a clear look at her face, my body stiffened. It was my ex-girlfriend, Linda. With a gentle smile, Linda jogged up to me. "It's been a long time, Elliot." "Yeah, it has. I came to see you specifically today. Can we talk?" I nodded. "Sure." As I got into a taxi with Linda, I caught a glimpse of Alexander standing nearby. His hawk-like eyes were locked onto me, his body frozen like a statue. At the cafe, "Elliot, how have you been?" Linda asked. "I'm doing fine," I replied. I couldn't help but recall the time my father was hospitalized. That was the hardest period of my life. No money, a sick father, and a breakup. But ever since my contract with Alexander began, things had started looking up. I had money for my father's treatment. And out of nowhere, a top specialist had contacted me, offering to transfer my father to his hospital. Under the specialist's care, my father's condition improved significantly. Linda's lips curled into a forced smile, her eyes filled with sorrow. "But I haven't been doing well. Elliot, I miss you so much. I know I hurt you when I left, and I regret it more and more each day." I thought that seeing Linda again would stir up my emotions, but to my surprise, I felt nothing but calmness. "Linda, I don't blame you. The past is in the past." Hope flickered in her eyes. "Then, can we get back together? Just like before? I've realized you're the one I truly love." I was stunned. I hadn't expected her to come back asking to reconcile. "Linda, it's over. We can't go back." Desperation filled her voice. "Do you have a girlfriend now?" I didn't want to give her false hope, so I made something up. "Yes, Linda, I have a girlfriend." Disappointment washed over Linda's face, and tears welled up in her eyes. I handed her a handkerchief. She took it and murmured nostalgically, "You're still the same gentle and kind to me." I didn't respond. That was just basic courtesy. After paying the bill and leaving the cafe, I noticed that Linda remained standing there, her eyes full of reluctance. After visiting my father at the hospital, I returned to Alexander's villa. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw Alexander sitting on the couch, wearing his gold-rimmed glasses, a magazine in hand, his face unreadable. "I'm back," I said. Without looking up, he replied coolly, That night, after showering, I lay in bed. Alexander appeared to be sleeping soundly. I made a conscious effort to keep my distance from him, but suddenly, he turned over and tightly wrapped his arms around my waist. His inner thoughts were anything but calm. "Wife met his ex-girlfriend today. Did they have a good time? Will he get back together with her?" It's possible. He really liked her. When they broke up, he used to cry near the office. What do I do? My wife is being stolen from me. Should I confess to him? My heart pounded furiously, like a trapped deer slamming against my chest. What if he actually confessed? Then his thoughts grew bitter and sorrowful. No, better not. He's straight. If he finds out I like him, he'll be terrified and run away. He'll want to stay as far from me as possible, disappearing from my life forever. I can't take that risk. If he hadn't needed money, if I hadn't pretended to have insomnia, he wouldn't have agreed to sleep beside me. When this contract ends, he won't be here anymore. I can only stay by his side as his boss and his friend. My fingers curled tightly, my emotions in turmoil. So, he had been faking insomnia all along. But he really did give me $1,000,000. So, I quickly stopped overthinking. Now I knew why he hadn't confessed, was afraid I would disappear. But what he didn't know was that I had already realized his feelings. And yet, I could never return them. The following week, ever since my meeting with Linda at the cafe, she had been persistently messaging me on WeChat or waiting for me outside the office after work. She said she had looked into it. I didn't actually have a girlfriend, and now she wanted to pursue me again. My colleagues had even started teasing me, saying my love life was flourishing. I laughed it off and shook my head, but they didn't believe me. At the same time, Alexander's mood seemed to grow colder each day. Many employees gossiped in hushed tones, wondering if something had upset him. But I knew exactly what was wrong. Every night, I could hear his inner voice. She was wailing in agony. My wife is being stolen away. Wife doesn't want me anymore. And other such dramatic lines. I felt both helpless and embarrassed. But no matter how hard I tried to avoid physical contact with him, I always failed. Because at night, Alexander, who was normally cold and distant, would transform into an incredibly clingy octopus, wrapping himself around me as if he never wanted to let go. One morning, when I arrived at the office, I opened my phone and saw another message from Linda. "Can we really not get back together?" I sighed. Even though I had already turned her down multiple times, she remained persistent. I decided to set things straight, once and for all. "Linda, this is the last time I'll say this. We're over. We cannot get back together. Let's not see each other anymore. I'll be deleting your WeChat, and I ask that you stop coming to my office. Please move on." I hesitated for a brief moment before pressing the delete button. I no longer loved Linda. I didn't want to give her any false hope, nor did I want to string her along. Later, Linda showed up at my office building a few more times, but the security guards turned her away. Eventually, she stopped coming altogether. And just like that, Alexander's mood seemed to brighten overnight. His cold, indifferent expression melted away, replaced by a subtle, satisfied smile. 1 month later, that day, Alexander took me along for a business negotiation. Dressed in a black suit, he looked composed and imposing, his demeanor sharp and professional. However, midway through the meeting, his leg brushed against mine. I didn't have time to move away. And then, I heard, "Ugh, why isn't this meeting over yet? I just want to go home and cuddle my wife. Wife's body wash smells so good today, it's a milky scent. I should use the same one as him." Wife has been working too hard. He's getting thinner again. I'll ask the housekeeper to make chicken soup for him. Yesterday, he ate more sweet and sour ribs than usual. He must like them. I'll have the housekeeper make more today." I buried my face lower, my ears burning. Who would have thought that the man sitting there with a serious, businesslike expression was actually thinking about these things? After the meeting, as we sat in the car on our way home, Alexander leaned back in the seat, closing his eyes to rest. Outside the window, an old man selling cotton candy rode past on a bicycle, calling out his wares. My hand accidentally touched Alexander's. I want to eat cotton candy, but what if he thinks I'm childish? No, I must maintain my perfect image. I couldn't help but chuckle. If only he knew who his perfect image had long since crumbled in my heart. He lowered his head slightly, his thick lashes fluttering like the wings of a black butterfly. The driver was about to drive away when, on impulse, I blurted out, "I want some cotton candy. I'll go buy some." Alexander's eyes shot open. His dark pupils gleamed with surprise as he looked at me. I didn't dare meet his gaze. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. But whatever, it was just cotton candy. I figured it could count as repayment for the sweets, the scarf, and everything else he had given me. I jogged over to the cotton candy vendor and bought 1 pink rabbit and 1 blue puppy. When I returned, I politely asked, "Alexander, they both look cute, so I bought 2. Do you want one?" A rare, genuine smile appeared on his face as he pointed at the pink rabbit. "Mile, I'll take this one." I handed it to him. He held it delicately between his fingers, his eyes sparkling with joy, waves of happiness rippling through them. Leaning against my shoulder, his thoughts poured into my ears. "Wife gave me cotton candy. It's so cute. I can't bear to eat it. I should get it vacuumed, sealed and preserved forever in my study." I froze. It's just cotton candy. There's no need to go that far, right? But when I saw the way he gazed at the cotton candy, as if it were the most precious gift in the world, my calm heart stirred once again. I took a bite of my cotton candy. Sweet. It melted on my tongue almost instantly, leaving only a lingering sugary taste. 1 week later, that evening, just before I was about to leave work, I received a call from my old classmate, William, inviting me to a reunion. I agreed. I asked Alexander for permission to return home later than usual that night. When I arrived at the bar, I spotted Linda in a red dress, seated in the center. "Linda was here?" William never mentioned this. William winked at me and whispered, "Linda said she wanted to give you a surprise. Take your time talking tonight." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Since we were surrounded by so many people, I couldn't outright reject Linda and embarrass her in front of everyone. Some classmates nudged me toward Linda, forcing me to sit beside her. I only exchanged a few polite words with Linda before falling silent. I decided that after the gathering ended, I would have a private conversation with her. Though I didn't want to be too harsh, her behavior had started to disrupt my life. And over the past few weeks, I had reflected deeply on my feelings. I was certain I no longer had any romantic interest in Linda. The lively atmosphere of the reunion gradually peaked. Under the encouragement of my classmates, I ended up drinking more than usual. As I grew a little dizzy, my phone rang. I answered, my voice sluggish. "Hello?" A familiar, deep voice came through the speaker. "Where are you?" It was Alexander. "I'm at a reunion with some old classmates," I replied. Without giving him a chance to respond, I hung up. 1 hour later, someone suggested playing truth or dare. After a few rounds, it was my turn. The dare? Kiss anyone in the room. Linda's face flushed, and she gazed at me expectantly. My head was spinning, but I wasn't stupid. I quickly realized that everyone was trying to set me up with Linda. Without looking at her, I pretended not to understand the hint and said, "I'll just take the punishment. I'll drink." A dozen glasses of alcohol were placed in front of me. If I refused the dare, I had to finish them all. Linda's eyes dimmed with disappointment, her expression stiff. Ignoring the playful jeers from my classmates, I picked up a glass, ready to drink. But just then, the door swung open. A tall figure stood at the entrance, his sharp gaze locked onto me. It was Alexander. Alexander stood at the entrance, dressed in a black overcoat, exuding an aura of cold elegance. His sharp brows were furrowed, and his dark eyes gleamed with an icy light. He strode over to me, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You've had enough to drink. Come home with me." Even in my slightly tipsy state, my instincts as an employee kicked in. Since my boss had given an order, I subconsciously replied, "Okay, let's go home." William frowned in confusion. "Elliot, who is he?" I hesitated for a second before answering vaguely, "He's a friend." I couldn't exactly say, "Oh, he's my boss, who pays me 1,000,000 yuan a year to sleep in his bed." That would be too weird. Ken, another old classmate, grinned mischievously. "But you haven't finished your punishment yet." I smiled. "All right, I'll finish my drink first." Alexander narrowed his eyes. "What punishment?" Someone eagerly explained the game's rules. As soon as Alexander understood the situation, his face darkened, and he stated firmly, "He's already had too much to drink. He shouldn't drink anymore. I'll take his place." The room fell silent. Everyone stared at Alexander in shock. I quickly shook my head, but Alexander leaned close and whispered, "Don't worry. You know my alcohol tolerance, I can drink an entire case without getting drunk." I watched as Alexander picked up the glass and, without hesitation, drank one after another. His lips, moistened by the alcohol, looked like fresh rose petals, tempting and seductive. I blamed the alcohol for making me suddenly aware of how good his lips looked. As he continued drinking, his brows furrowed slightly. His dark eyes flickered with a momentary trace of pain. Something felt off. I had been his assistant for 2 years. I was familiar with his subtle expressions. Something wasn't right. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. His thoughts instantly flowed into my mind. My stomach hurts. The doctor told me to avoid alcohol, but it's fine. As long as wife didn't kiss someone else, I can endure this. I haven't even kissed my wife yet. I want to kiss wife so bad. Something inside me snapped. I pulled the glass away from his hand and said firmly, "Enough. I changed my mind. I'll take the dare instead." According to the rules, I had to kiss someone in the room. I turned to face Alexander, and then, just as he wanted, I grabbed his chin and pressed my lips against his. The room erupted in screams and gasps. Alexander's eyes widened in disbelief, his entire body going rigid. His thoughts exploded. Wife kissed me. I'm dead. So sweet. Am I dreaming? Wife, please kiss me to death. I was still tipsy, but I was fully aware of what I had just done. My ears burned, and I quickly pulled away. Linda's expression turned pale. Her voice trembled. "Elliot, you..." I feigned nonchalance. "I completed the dare. Now, neither of us needs to drink anymore." Alexander's face returned to his usual cool and calm demeanor, as if nothing had happened, but his grip on my wrist tightened. He said in a commanding tone, "I'm taking him home." Ignoring the shocked stares of my classmates, he led me out of the bar. On the way home, I was still a little unsteady on my feet. As I stumbled, Alexander suddenly stopped walking. Before I could react, he lifted me into his arms in a princess carry. I stiffened in his embrace. His voice was calm, as if he were stating a simple fact. "You're drunk. Carrying you is faster." But his thoughts were screaming, "Wife is drunk. So cute. This is my first time carrying wife like this. It feels so good. I want to carry him every day. He smells so nice. I don't want to let go." I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could say anything, I suddenly felt nauseous. The next second, I vomited. Right onto Alexander's custom-tailored suit. I waited to hear him complain or scold me. Instead, his thoughts remained surprisingly gentle. Good. Now wife will feel better. He must have had too much to drink. I'll make him some honey water when we get home. Damn it. I should have come sooner. If I had, wife wouldn't have drunk so much. Inside the car, He wiped my mouth with a handkerchief before finally taking off his ruined suit jacket. Even then, he didn't let go of me. He held me close, comforting me like a child. "Hang in there. We'll be home soon," he murmured softly. I curled up in his arms, feeling inexplicably safe and warm. When we got home, Alexander did everything for me. He made me honey water. He helped me wash up. He even changed me into clean pajamas. After all that, I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted. I didn't even realize when I fell asleep. The next morning, when I woke up, my head was pounding, but my memory from last night was crystal clear. I had kissed Alexander, and I still remembered how sweet his lips tasted. I went to the dining room, where a simple breakfast was already waiting. Alexander sat across from me, his gaze fixed on me, a barely suppressed smile tugging at his lips. I avoided his gaze, my voice low. "I drank too much last night. Thanks for bringing me home, boss." Alexander responded, "It's nothing. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have been able to sleep anyway. About last night." Feeling guilty, I quickly interrupted. "It was just a game, a dare." For a split second, his expression darkened, but then he quickly forced a small smile and nodded. "Yeah, I understand," he said quietly. "Eat your breakfast." 2 weeks later, we were in the middle of a company meeting. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, his expression serious and unreadable. My gaze drifted to his lips. Ever since that night, I had developed an inexplicable problem. I couldn't stop staring at Alexander's lips. And worse, my mind kept replaying the moment I kissed him. My ears burned. Alexander noticed my stare and raised an eyebrow. "You seem distracted today," he remarked. I quickly averted my gaze, my heart racing. I'm straight, right?" Later that day, I brought some documents to Alexander's office. He frowned slightly. "You don't look well. Are you feeling sick?" I shook my head. "I'm fine." He reached out and pressed the back of his hand against my forehead. "Good. No fever," he said softly. My heart pounded erratically. As I left his office, I checked the date on my phone. Today was the last day of our 1-year contract. I had once eagerly counted down to this day. But now, I felt nothing but emptiness. Had I already fallen for him? That night, after work, Alexander spoke to me. "My insomnia hasn't improved. Would you consider renewing the contract for another year?" I hesitated. I already knew he had been faking his insomnia all along. If I agreed, wouldn't that be the same as agreeing to be his boyfriend? But I wasn't ready to enter a relationship with a man. His voice was calm, but if I listened carefully, I could hear the cautious hope in it. "I'll give you time to think about it," he said. "I'll wait for your answer." "All right," I replied. That night, I moved back to my own apartment. Alexander personally drove me home. Lying in my familiar bed, I tossed and turned. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep. For the past year, I had slept soundly every night in Alexander's bed. The next day at the office, while I was in the break room, I overheard some coworkers gossiping. "Did you hear? Alexander is getting married." "What? That's impossible. Alexander doesn't even have a girlfriend." "I have a friend who's related to his family. They said it's a business marriage. He's engaged to Lucy from the Liu family." Wow. I guess that makes sense. Rich people always marry other rich people, right? I also heard about it. Lucy is the heiress of the Liu family. It's a power marriage between two corporate giants. My heart is breaking. Alexander is getting married. I clenched my fingers around my coffee mug. He's getting married? What does that have to do with me? I repeated that thought in my head, but for some reason the coffee tasted much more bitter than usual. Over the next week, I tried my best to avoid Alexander. Even when I had to interact with him, I minimized physical contact. One evening, after work, I stood by the elevator, waiting for it to arrive. Just then, Alexander stepped up beside me. He glanced at me. "Let's go down together." I had originally planned to wait for the next elevator to avoid him, but now I had no choice but to step inside with him. I stood against the wall, trying to keep my distance. Yet, he deliberately moved closer. Our arms brushed. And then, I heard his thoughts. Finally, I get to see my wife. I missed him so much. I left work early on purpose to wait by the elevator just so I could see him. I just want to hug him. I can't sleep without him. I bit my lip. My heart started pounding. If his mind was still full of me, then why was he marrying someone else? I couldn't help myself, I blurted out. Alexander, I heard you're getting engaged to Lucy. Congratulations. Alexander's expression froze. Then, without hesitation, he denied it immediately. That's not true. Crappy almost called him wife out loud just now. Why would I marry someone else? The only person I want to marry is Elliot. My grandfather and the Liu family arranged this marriage without my permission. I already refused, but somehow rumors still spread. I need to clear this up immediately. Even though Elliot doesn't care about me, I still want him to know that I would never marry someone else. As I listened to his frantic thoughts, the tightness in my chest disappeared. I forced myself to remain calm. Oh, I see. I just heard some office gossip. He looked genuinely nervous. Don't believe any of it. It's all just rumors. All right. I won't believe it, I said casually. But inside, my heart felt light again. So, I had been worried about this after all. I had cared a lot about whether or not he was getting married. I had been jealous. At that moment, I finally understood. I had already fallen for Alexander. The very next day, Alexander made the company's PR department issue an internal email, officially denying the engagement rumors. From that day forward, no one in the office dared to bring up his supposed marriage again. I realized he had done this for me, and suddenly I started thinking maybe it was time to talk to him and be honest about our feelings. But once I opened that door, I would have to make a decision. Would I be willing to accept his love and be with him? A few days later, Alexander continued driving me home every evening. From his thoughts, I learned that he had already refused the arranged marriage and persuaded his grandfather to stop interfering in his love life. That night, after he dropped me off at my apartment, I saw Linda waiting outside my building. I frowned. How did she know where I lived? As soon as Linda saw me, she rushed forward. Elliot, I have something to tell you. I took a step back. Linda, we have nothing to talk about. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Her face twisted with anger. Elliot, do you even know who your boss really is? He's gay. I wasn't shocked. I had known Alexander liked me for a long time now. Linda continued, her voice filled with disgust. I just found Al's been obsessed with you for years. He's a pervert, a freak. He's been secretly watching you since college. He even got drunk once and kept calling your name, saying he wanted to marry you. You need to get away from him. From the corner of my eye, I saw Alexander standing a few meters away. He was holding a small gift bag, and his face was pale. His eyes were filled with fear. If Linda had said this to me 2 months ago, I would have been shocked and panicked. But now, I already knew that Alexander had been secretly in love with me all along. I wasn't surprised at all. The only thing that shocked me Wash had fallen for me that early, freshman year, but as far as I could remember, he had never appeared in my life back then. I kept my voice calm. Linda, I've known he's gay for a long time. Alexander's eyes widened in disbelief. Linda was equally stunned. You knew? I continued. And one more thing I need to correct you. Being gay doesn't make someone a freak. Even if Alexander is gay, that doesn't give you the right to insult or discriminate against him. Linda's expression twisted in frustration. Elliot, then what about that time in the game? You knew he was gay, yet you still kissed him. You did it just to piss me off, didn't you? I replied calmly. I kissed him that night not to make you jealous. I just didn't want him to keep drinking for my sake. Linda raised her voice. Elliot, you're straight. We dated for years. There's no way you could like a man. He's gay and has been lusting after you this whole time. Are you really going to stay by his side? I felt Alexander's fingers tighten around mine. His entire body was trembling. I looked at his face. There was pain and fear in his expression, as if he were bracing himself for the worst. And at that moment, all of my hesitation disappeared. Sometimes, decisions happen in an instant. I exhaled and looked Linda straight in the eyes. Linda, this is between me and him. It's none of your business. And one more thing, even if I was straight before, I still fell in love with him. In that moment, Alexander's eyes lit up with excitement. He completely forgot about Linda. He rushed up to me, gripping my shoulders tightly. Elliot, do you love me? Really? I met his gaze and answered honestly, Yeah, I've fallen for you. I was done running away. Alexander pulled me into a tight embrace. I love you. His voice was overwhelmed with joy. I'm not dreaming, am I? Elliot, say it again, please. Seeing the pure happiness in his eyes, I felt a strange mix of heartache and amusement. I love you, I repeated. Alexander grabbed my hand tightly. Let's go home. Come back with me, okay? I miss you so much. Every day I hate sending you back here. I don't want to be apart from you. I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Linda watched in disbelief, jealousy and anger flashing across her face. Elliot, you're disgusting. You're straight. How can you be with him? Are you only doing this for money? You don't really love him, do you? Before I could say anything, Alexander's sharp voice cut through the night. And what does our relationship have to do with you? His eyes were filled with icy contempt. If you think it's disgusting, then don't look. Just stay the hell away from us. He held my hand tightly, protectively. He loves me. He loves my money, and he loves me. And what about you? Weren't you the one who left him for money? He never even blamed you for that. But what you shouldn't have done was come crawling back because Lucy told you to. Did you ever truly love Elliot, or were you just using him again? I froze. Linda's face went pale. Her guilt was written all over her expression. You're lying. I didn't, she muttered. Alexander's voice was cold and sharp. I had you investigated. Lucy sent you here. The first time, she had you try to get back together with Elliot to make me give up on him, but you failed. And now, after I rejected the engagement, Lucy is furious. So she sent you again to try and drive Elliot away from me. Linda didn't say a word, but her panicked and guilty expression was enough to confirm it. I looked at her with calm indifference. Leave, Linda. Don't ever come near me again. If you do, I'll call the police. Linda opened her mouth, wanting to say something. But then she saw Alexander's bodyguards approaching. She panicked and quickly ran away. Alexander held my hand tightly, as if afraid I would disappear. His deep eyes locked onto mine. I chuckled. You were right about one thing. I do love your money. He tensed. But, I smiled, I love you even more. His entire face lit up. He grabbed my hands and laughed out loud. I believe you, Elliot. I believe you. Then, does this mean we're together now? His inner voice was already screaming. Wife loves me. Even if the king of the world says otherwise, wife still loves me. Wife wouldn't lie. The way he's looking at meets love. He's letting me hold his hand. That means he loves me. I had thought he would at least doubt me a little, but I had underestimated just how deep his love-struck delusions went. He had already convinced himself that I was madly in love with him. I smirked. Yeah, we're dating now, boyfriend. His eyes sparkled with pure joy. He blurted out without thinking, Wife, I love you. Then he froze. Shit, I called him wife, out loud. Crap, is he going to be mad? Guys don't like being called wife, right? He hesitated. Can I call you wife from now on? His voice was cautious, as if he was afraid I would get angry. My ears turned bright red. Up until now, I had only ever heard him call me wife through his thoughts. This was the first time he had said it aloud. I felt my face grow hot. After a few seconds, I nodded shyly. Okay. The sheer excitement on his face was unmatched. He immediately hugged me and whispered wife over and over again in my ear, each time sounding more affectionate. I was speechless. I suddenly remembered something. I had once seen a man confess to Alexander. Alexander had reacted with pure disgust. At the time, I had assumed it was because he was straight, but now I asked him about it. He explained immediately. That guy? He was a criminal. He had a record for harassing and assaulting people. I was disgusted because of that. I finally understood. So I had misunderstood him all along. At that moment, Alexander pulled out a pair of blue wool gloves from his bag. It turned out that when I got out of the car earlier, he had forgotten to give them to me. He had rushed back just to deliver them only to stumble upon my conversation with Linda. I stared at the soft, carefully knitted gloves, my lips curving into a small smile. Through his inner voice, I already knew he had knitted them himself. My boyfriend is seriously adorable. How could I not fall for him? At night, Alexander brought me back to his villa. And just like always, after taking a shower, he deliberately wore a loosely tied robe, exposing his chest, and casually strutted around me, showing off his perfect physique. Then, he wrapped me in his arms tightly. Even though he wasn't saying anything, his inner voice was practically screaming in my ears. Wife loves me. Wife was watching me drink milk earlier. Wife is wearing the pajamas I prepared for him. Wife just patted my head. Wife is staring at my lips. Does he want to kiss me? I really, really want to kiss my wife. Kiss him to death. No, wait, death is bad luck. I just really want to kiss my wife. I barely managed to hold back my laughter. Alexander gently stroked my hair and cautiously asked, Wife, when did you realize I liked you? I had no plans to reveal my mind-reading ability, so I casually made something up. About a month ago, one night you were asleep, and you suddenly hugged me, kissed me, and whispered, Wife, I love you. That's when I knew, but I was too scared to respond, so I pretended it never happened. Alexander's inner voice erupted. I knew it. I knew I kissed my wife in my sleep. I always dream about kissing him. Of course I couldn't hold back in real life. He didn't suspect a thing. Then, curious, I asked, Then when did you start secretly liking me? Alexander instantly perked up. His expression turned proud and nostalgic as he eagerly began telling his love story. It all started in our freshman year. One night, in the dark alley behind the campus bar street, he was ambushed and severely beaten by a group of men. I had stumbled upon him by chance. Seeing that he was unable to move, I immediately called an ambulance and stayed with him. To keep him awake, I kept talking to him, encouraging him not to pass out. Even though he was barely conscious, he had memorized my face. And that was when he fell for me. I thought back carefully. That incident did happen. But at the time, I wasn't wearing my glasses, and his face was covered in blood. There was no way I could have recognized him. After accompanying him to the hospital, I had an urgent matter to attend to, so I left after paying for part of his medical fees. I had never imagined that the injured student I saved was Alexander. After recovering, Alexander searched for me. He found out that I was Elliot, a freshman majoring in philosophy. But by then, I had already fallen for Linda and was actively pursuing her. He had watched from the sidelines, knowing I was straight. So he never showed himself. He didn't want to disturb my life. One time, he got drunk and accidentally confessed his feelings in front of his dorm mates. He had been calling my name in his sleep, whispering, wife, over and over. So after that, everyone in his dorm knew he was gay and had a crush on me. By sophomore year, I had officially started dating Linda. He thought our paths would never cross again, but he still kept an eye on me from afar. Until years later, after graduation, I unknowingly joined his family's company and became his assistant. At that time, I was still in a relationship, but a year ago, I broke up with Linda and was in desperate need of money. That's when Alexander saw his chance. He came up with the idea of offering me a 1-year contract to sleep in his bed. His excuse? I have insomnia. Only you can help me sleep. But the real reason? It all went back to one business trip. That night, we had shared a single bed. I had unknowingly hugged him in my sleep, and he had gone insane with excitement. That was when he realized he desperately wanted to hold me every night. Originally, he had planned to use that 1 year to satisfy his longing to hold me until he got tired of it, and then he would let go. But instead, he only fell deeper. The deeper his love grew, the more terrified he became. He was afraid that if I knew the truth, I would run away forever. So he kept his love hidden and continued secretly yearning for me. After hearing his story, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotions. If I hadn't suddenly gained the ability to read minds, I might have never known that someone had been in love with me for 6 years. I looked into his eyes, filled with joy and affection, and I felt my heart soften. So, as he wished, I kissed him. His inner voice erupted with excitement. Wife kissed me. Wife? I love you. I'm going to pass out from happiness. 6 months later. I heard that the Liu family had gone bankrupt. Alexander explained. Their company had been in financial trouble for a long time. They had hidden their losses and tried to secure a marriage alliance with Alexander's family to save themselves. But Alexander had seen through their scheme and warned his grandfather. In the end, his family canceled the engagement entirely. Linda's final downfall. Linda had tried contacting me several times after that. Through various sources, I found out, after breaking up with me, she had dated a gambling addict. She had racked up massive debts and lost her job as a flight attendant. Yet, instead of learning her lesson, she set her sights on me again. After failing to get money from Lucy, she tried to blackmail me and Alexander. She threatened to expose our relationship if we didn't pay her. But we were done tolerating her, so we called the police. Soon after, she was arrested for attempted extortion. 2 years later, Alexander and I officially got married abroad. This time, I truly became his wife. At our wedding, he held me close and whispered lovingly, "Wife, I love you." I wrapped my arms around his neck and smiled. "Husband, I love you too." His inner voice echoed sweetly in my ears. Tonight, I can finally hold my wife in my arms again. I can't wait